Okay, so let me take another sip of soda and then we'll just get started. I got up a little bit late because we met some people at the airport last night just on a whim. We were there late doing a photo shoot, and then they kind of showed up with some beer, and we ended up staying there till like 1 o'clock in the morning. It was really nice, though. It was really fun. We haven't done that for a while, so it's great. Okay, cool. I've got Kevin Kimball here and Tony, my partner in this project. Kevin, thanks for coming on and joining us.
Good to see you guys today.
We're here to talk about this thing right here. I've got a little prop so I can show you what we're going to talk about. This is a model of the Hall Bulldog, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And Kevin, you're a builder. You've built a bunch of cool airplanes, and you have in fact built a GBZ, which is a Bob Hall design. Before he designed the Bulldog, he designed the GBZ. And Tony and I were talking. I thought you'd be a really good person to talk about this project with. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that project? Let's get started.
Sure. Yeah. I guess it goes back to about the time when Stephen Delmar flew the R2, say 90, 91 in that area of time, that a friend of mine and I, Jeff Eicher, we were like, oh man, we really want to build a cool airplane. And we actually kind of had the idea of taking a Howard DGA-15 and demilitarizing it, so to speak, make it look more like a DGA-11, some of the cooler ones from that period, or kind of make a hot rod based on the Howard. So we started to kind of think along those lines, and we told Jim Yonkin that story, and he says, "Well, why do you want to do that? That's a waste of time." And so, okay, so
was this before or after he did the Mr. Mulligan replicas?
Way after, yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So we were like, okay, well, maybe we need to think of something else. And about that time, again, look at the timing, and there wasn't the ability to have a conversation like we're doing now, or smartphones or anything else. I didn't even have a cell phone. So it was Trade a Plane. And in Trade a Plane, there was an ad for a GBZ project. And it was out west somewhere, and Jeff got all excited. He was like, man, this is it. We should just get this. And it's already started. We're down the road, we can just really jump into it. And so he went out west and looked at it, bought it, and we had it shipped back here. And then immediately when we saw it, it was like, well, this is, it was a bunch of sawn out plywood ribs and a welded up frame that was pretty crooked. I think from the firewall, the tail post was literally like 1.5 inches off center. If it was a real kind of meh. I can't even remember who built it, the whole backstory on it. But what it did is it got us hooked on the Z. And that's what it really did. So there you go. We got us hooked on there. And we got a set of Vern Clements drawings and a couple other stuff that just kind of came along with it. Not much data to speak of, but then the hook was set. So now we have to build the Z because we wanted that airplane. So we took that project was donated to a museum, and I think it's a static display airplane someplace now. They just did a mock-up stuff and put it all together and use the pieces to make the static only kind of rendering of the Z. And then we just started doing research on it and started asking all the questions we could ask and find all the people that we could talk to and gather up every article, whether it was a garbage article or not, and just look for anything that was a valuable little tidbit of information. Then started drawing up plans for it and created all the modeling for it. Well, back then it was just 2D CAD. It was AutoCAD 9 I was using. And then did the stress analysis work on it and started building the parts. And it took us about 4.5 years.
And you used, you said 4.5 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you used Vern Clements drawings, which we're really in favor of for the Bulldog as well. They're clearly the best drawings that are available for that aircraft. What kind of details did Vern show on the Z drawings? And on the Bulldog drawings, there's some kind of like tantalizing details of the internal structure, but it's not really something you could build off of. Is that sort of how it was with the Z as well?
It was, but fortunately I had, there were a lot of photographs of the Z structure out there that we were able to uncover. I found photos of the fuselage frame sitting on sawhorses right after it was welded. There's a photo of Bob Hall holding one of the wing panels that's on the butt fittings, and he's standing there holding one of the wing panels uncovered next to him. So, these are things that, along with Vern's information, which gave you some dimensional information, cross sections of the fuselage, things like that, kind of overall layout. And then you're able to look at these structural photos and then say, okay, this is good. Another key that we had is I had, this, which is, I got a copy of this 1931 Aero Digest.
Yeah.
And in this is the story that actually is like a white paper that Bob Hall presented to the SAE at the convention that year after the races. And he spells out the fuselage was made of X4130 tubing. Yeah. The front gear truss was 2-inch whatever, and this size and that size. The ribs were truss style ribs on 5.4-inch centers. Compression members were on 27-inch centers. Spars were 25.5 inches apart. These kind of numbers he just spelled out because he's talking to fellow engineers about the details of it. And so with what we did is we took Vern's drawings to get our layouts and everything, and use that for the plan form of the wing, the plan form of the tail, profile views, sections, and then started making drawings from that, using all this other information to fill in the blanks. So I would say we ended up with 7 out of 10 pieces of the puzzle in most cases. So you had 3 more to fill in. So it was pretty good.
That Aero Digest magazine, those are available online now. Don't know if you were aware of that, but you can actually go to the website, and I have downloaded most of the magazines from that period. There's a lot of really interesting stuff. Some of the things that are fun to read are, kind of debates over how fast airplanes can get, which is kind of fun nowadays to read their perspective on that,
Right.
And it also had, write-ups about the National Air Races, which is, I think, very interesting to read, period write-up about the event itself. Very cool stuff. Well, we don't have some of the benefits you have because I'm not aware of any pictures of the internal structure of the Bulldog. There might be some. I'd hope there would be. You would think at some point they would have taken some, though it was a pretty secretive project. And the Z didn't live for a long time, but I think the Bulldog was around for quite a bit less time. It was only around for a few weeks, it seems like. So even though we have a lot of pictures of the outside, we don't have a lot of the detail to go off of except for what Vern graciously spent his time working towards, which was an amazing thing. Without Vern, I don't know how we would tackle this. There's some clues in the drawings from Clements that kind of guide us a little bit. Tony was explaining to me that there were spar doublers, probably of steel, in the wing structure. And I'm actually going to bring up, if I can here, I'm going to bring up those drawings because it kind of shows you what he did for us here. Even though it's not spelled out, it's still very helpful to have these drawings. So here, you can see the drawing now, I think, right?
Yes.
Yeah, great. And if I zoom in on it, so look at this right here. There's the spar. And I always looked at this stuff when I was an RC modeler and thought, I wonder what that was supposed to be. But it's a spar doubler, I think, now, like you had on the Z, I believe.
Yeah.
The doubler.
Yeah, the R1 and R2 had doublers like that, where it was a plate of plywood and then a plate of aluminum, front and back, bolted through.
Oh, aluminum.
And, yeah, and when we did that when we built the Z-Wing, we took that R improvement to the spar and did that. And so it beefed up, it made the wing go from, I think it was like a 9G wing to a 14G wing just by doing some of that stuff to it.
And we have
the original Z did not have the plywood doublers, for instance.
It had a small plywood doubler that may be a foot long, just a small area there where the fittings bolted in, but it didn't have that big aluminum tapered plate with all the bolts through it. So we retrofitted that in, and we used a Granville fix in the wing. Had the Granvilles built another set of Z-Wings, I think they would have done it. Seeing this information here, assuming this is accurate and not just Vern's assumption based off of the R design, then I think it kind of confirms that had Bob Hall built another set of Z-Wings, they would have had some big doublers in them.
And what we have in Clement's drawing is, of course, this Clement's own assertion that Bob Hall had accepted. Here it is, actually.
Yeah. Yep.
Bob had looked at the drawings and had approved them. Well, that's pretty good pedigree right there.
Sure.
We have to assume that Bob knew, what he was talking about. It wasn't just being generous. There's no real way to know, but it looks like it's pretty good. I mean, it looks like you can build an airplane off of it for sure. If you look at the ribs, it's interesting because it looks like it's butt ribs against the spar, the front spar. This spar is trapped inside, but the front spar doesn't look like it's supposed to be. Now, this is just basically a sketch, but I did see some pictures, I don't have them handy, where you can actually see a little crease in the bottom of the wing where that front spar would be. So it does appear that there was the ribs were, the front and back of the ribs were glued on to that spar. That may be exactly how it was done.
Referring to a full depth spar, not a without the cap ribs passing over.
That's how the Z was. It was full depth, and then the plywood skin came back all the way onto the truss rib, and that's what kind of tied it together.
And there's no skin on top that helped with that. It was simply the covering went over the spar, the top of the spar, on the top of the wing, and the bottom of the spar.
There's plywood that goes from the nose back to just after the spar.
Yeah, that makes sense then. Okay, it's not shown in the drawing, but there is.
Right.
Okay, so I see this drawing is just showing the rib, not the skin that would be on top of it. So there must be cap strips behind that. Is that what you were saying?
No, the plywood would just terminate. It's only a 1/16 of an inch thick, and then the fabric continues from there back. And you notice on that rib 19 right at the nose, you see it looks like almost like a triangle, very at the nose end in the nose rib itself. That's actually a leading edge stick that runs spanwise, and it's actually, the nose rib does have a V cut in it, and you put a square piece of wood in it on a 45, and that is your plywood to both of those, and then after you plywood to both of those, you round off the rest of the nose.
Yeah, I designed many model airplane wings that
exactly. It's the same. It's the same as
Yep. Okay, that makes really good sense. These metal doublers also match up where we would have the strut attachment. Which if we look at a different picture here, if I can find the right picture while zooming in, here's this big honking strut attachment. I assume that those spar doublers tied into some sort of vertical piece that ran through here. I did see some pictures make it look like there's a bracket. Like this might have been some metal in here, that there was a bracket that screwed into this area, like at a perpendicular line.
That would only make sense just judging by the way things are designed.
Yeah, I may be able to find those for us to look at. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, like I was saying about Clement's drawing is he really set out to draw something that would there'd be an airplane. Another thing we want to talk about with you is the fuselage structure, and I've got some photos I want to show you of that because actually, before I leave these drawings here, I'll just go ahead and say that he did a good job of drawing what the structure would look like, what he thought it looked like. And then he made some notes here that didn't really know what the tubing was, but that it was very heavy, possibly 1 1/4 inch, which is pretty heavy. Do you remember? I think you said what the Z was. What was that? Do you remember?
Back in the tail, it was pretty small stuff. The longerons in the Z, I think, were 1 inch. But some of the gear truss, because the Z had the truss, the big fillets in the lower wing, and the landing gear mounted into that. So it was big 2 inch on the front and inch and 3/4, 1.5 inches for the rear truss. So that would be all up in this front area. It was pretty beefy. Back in the tail, it got pretty light pretty quick.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me throw.
Did the longeron step down in the Z, or did it stay 1 inch all the way to the tail post?
No, they stepped down.
Let me see if I can find some the photos I've taken here and get them up. I'm going to start with.
Well, Jim's looking for that. An interesting note that Kevin had told me was about the length of the Z. Why don't you tell Jim, about the overall length and the fuselage and how you built the frame?
Yeah, the dimensions of the Z, it's 15 feet 1 inch long from the center of the propeller split line of the hub to the tip of the rudder. So if we look at the S1 that's in the picture above Tony's head, that airplane from the tip of the spinner to the tip of the rudder is about 6 inches longer than the Z. And the Z had a 985, 535 horsepower motor on it and 30 pound per square foot wing loading.
Right. So, well, and you consider
how tiny the airplane is.
Yeah. And people's perception's so funny because they look at like this airplane with a 210 horse Lycoming, and they go, that is way too small to have that big of an engine on. And, I don't know, it makes it a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine what, over twice the horsepower.
Yeah, 1,000 cubic inches.
Yeah, cubic inches of fun.
Yeah. So it's the Z was I think it's 23-foot wingspan and 15 feet 1 inch long.
Here's some pictures
wow.
of the fuselage.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a project that was started by Jim Jenkins, who I have not met, and I would enjoy meeting, and he's done a lot of work here. But this project was, I would say, it's probably fair to say, languished in a museum in Washington for many years without, unfortunately, a lot of real hope of getting done. Though I think Jim probably did his very, very best. I'm sure he did, because he has a lot of energy for the project. But it didn't really ever get anywhere. Other priorities just took over, and then eventually that museum folded, and the project found its way down. I guess the WAM, the Western, I can never remember what it is. Western
Aviation Automobile.
No,
Museum. Antique Aviation.
No,
Automobile.
Antique Airplane and Automobile Museum. That's what it is.
Yeah,
Western Antique.
Yeah, that's right. Because
I
thought, oh, no helicopters allowed.
Yeah.
But it's the WAM Museum, and we approached the owner of that museum, or the head of that museum, Terry, and managed to work out a deal to go ahead and take the project on, because it wasn't going to get finished there either. And it's just, to me, I've always wanted to see a replica fly. There's no real point in having two bulldogs out there. So I just sort of waited for this project for a long time, and when it has become so clear that it's just not going to get finished for whatever reason, what a shame. It made the easy decision to go, well, let's go pick it up. Now, we did that without really knowing a lot about it, Kevin. We don't really, we didn't really get a chance to get a good look at it, and we're not really 100% sure we're going to pick up from this. Maybe we have to make a different decision. But having looked at it, it looks like you did a lot of really great work. And I'm just gonna, I don't have great photos available to me right now. I'm gonna try and get off my phone while we're talking about something else. But this is sort of what it looked like when it was moved. And this will show you the tail first. This is extremely heavy, but probably accurate, I think.
Judging by the Jenkins drawing, or Vern Clemens drawings, it looks pretty accurate. Yeah, then also we've referenced that with the original tail that it flew with. It changed, in that first 8 months period. But
yeah, that looks very, very Bob Hall on the the E series, the Z, very, very much the way the tail was built.
Well, it seems like it weighs a lot, but more than it could possibly ever need to weigh.
Right.
Can you zoom in on the attach area?
You mean up here?
Yeah, that area. Yep. Nice seat lamp. So, it's interesting. It's got these, what would you call it?
Saddle clamps kind of thing.
Yeah, saddle clamps. Yep. Yeah. On there. We don't have a good picture of the front attach. It's got a really weird, almost adjustable stabilizer bracket on the front that we're not quite sure how that thing works, but we don't have a good picture of that. But is that kind of typical of those saddle clamps, or is that something from
the day that was pretty common? On the Z, the rear spar was adjustable with the trim mechanism, so that would be movable and go up and down. On the front end, had a ground adjustable set of blocks to where you could pick. For instance, if he's like, I'm out of nose trim, I don't know exactly what I need, he could course move the stab either up or down to get it, change the instance on the stab. But the rear was adjustable with a trim system that was very much like the Model Y, which it had struts going out and connected in the center here, and it actually jack screwed the rear of the stabilizer up and down with a crank in the cockpit. And then when I look at the pictures of the Bulldog, it looks like there's a slot above where the saddle clamp would be. There's a slot in the side of the airplane, and so it had some adjustment available. There's not a lot of trim needed. I mean, even, Delmar found that, and on the Z, we found it, set it the first time, and just really didn't mess with it. So
the M6 stays pretty stable through airspeed, right? It doesn't move around a lot.
Yeah. So you can see the complication involved in making this, what a tremendous amount of work it took to fish mouth this and step the tubing down. And that's probably is exactly how the original was built. And it's not an easy little project.
Yeah, the Z didn't have step down spars. It was common length, and the diagonals and everything weren't that beefy. I mean, this is definitely super beefy compared.
But you had a braced tail, wire braced tail on the Z.
Correct.
Right? Yeah.
Right. We had wire brace.
Do you have any records of how much the tail weighed, or any of the other components of the Z?
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, it's all right.
It's probably fairly similar construction to a Pitts S1, I would imagine. Maybe a little bit heavier though.
Moving on, we
Z.
have the vertical stab and the rudder. And this is, of course, the fourth version of the rudder they tried. They went from a small rudder or small vertical stab, a little bit enlarged rudder. Then they added a dorsal fin. And there's some debate over whether the aircraft flew well enough without the taller rudder. I, of course, love the small rudder the best. I think it was the prettiest. I have seen some references to people who say that Bob Hall said the plane flew fine with a small rudder, but that the pilot they had hired, Russell Thaw, was not up to the task. Any perspective on that? Have you ever heard stories about that?
There seemed to have been a little bit of a rift there with those guys, and I thought it was interesting that the airplane retained Russell Thaw's initials on the turtle deck, and I wonder if that was just RWT on the turtle deck.
Yeah.
I thought that might have been Bob Hall sticking his thumb in his nose at Bob.
Well,
at Thaw.
They did eventually remove those. Those weren't there on the race, so I think there must be somewhere in there he decided not to have them. But yeah, I noticed that too. Russell William Thaw. Yeah. I don't know if obviously Thaw was not comfortable flying the airplane, but that doesn't mean the airplane wasn't. It doesn't mean the airplane was a great airplane. It might have been he was not a very good pilot. It could have been that the airplane was a handful.
And it just wasn't what he was expecting
at this point to try out the other rudder, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'll tell you a little bit of a story that I was told by someone who worked with Bob Hall at Grumman, in later years. And this was Corky Meyer. And Corky worked underneath Bob, and he was one of the test pilots. And when they did the F-8 Bearcat, Bob Hall did the test flying on it. And Corky told me he used to visit here, and he said, I really wanted to fly it. And Bob said, it's not ready. We need to do some fixing to the tail. We need to do this. We need to do that. And so they made some changes to the tail. Bob flew it again. He says, now can I fly it? He says, no, not yet. We're going to make some more changes. Did some more changes. And then finally, after the third set of changes, he let Corky go out and fly it after he had flown. So that's good enough. Here, you can go fly it. We're still going to fix it some more. Corky told me it was the most unstable airplane he had ever flown. He couldn't imagine what it was like when Bob Hall was flying it. And when he was watching it from the ground, it looked like it was on rails. So taking that as a bit of perspective in this discussion that he had with Thaw, Bob was an exceptional pilot.
Yeah.
So, his perception of good enough, and what he could handle, other folks may not just be dialed in as well on something like that.
Yeah. Well,
it would be easy to see that Thaw might say, this is not for me.
Yeah. Well, let me show you some other pictures of the truss that we have here handy. This is forward section. Of course, you can see the cockpit area here and the basic instrument panel put in place. We got some wood formers that will be needed to make the shape of the fuselage round, of course. You can see where the stringers would go in here. It's sheeted aluminum from this point forward pretty much, so that's why those cutouts stop. Here's the gull mounts here. And you can't really quite see it, but there's a strut mount here and a strut carry through, and that's just to give you perspective. That's 2-inch steel tube for the strut carry through. I measured it yesterday, and most of this here is 1 1/4, 1 1/2 up here, maybe 1 1/8 in some places. There's also some it goes down to about 7/8 at the tail of the airplane, but it's generally very heavy. It's very, very large tubing. If you remember the Clements drawings I showed you, it said that it was very, that was big honking tubing. It was very heavy, but it looks like overkill. And of course, Tony and I can scratch our heads because not a lot of people have made a home-built aircraft with actual Pratt & Whitney Wasp engines before. We're kind of treading into some dangerous ground, maybe. But Mr. Mulligan was built with a 1340, and I read that it had the replica had 1-inch tubing and 7/8-inch tubing. So it seems like that should be enough. Do you have any perspective on that?
Well, I mean, just have to do some calculations and see, what's there. And I don't know what the wall thicknesses are on these. That would be easy to find out by drilling a few holes and, poking through if Jim didn't have records on what it was. But, you can map it out and just run an analysis and see if it needs to be that heavy. And then make a determination. It's, an airplane like this, all the replicas, even the original GB racers were notoriously tail heavy. It's really easy to get an airplane tail heavy. One thing they never really talked about is that on the Z and the R. You know, they said, oh, the Z is it's published, I don't know, whatever, it's like 14 or 1,500 pounds empty. In reality, the thing was much heavier because I had to put a sheet of lead on the firewall to get the CG right. And I think the R's suffered from that too. They just never published any of that information.
We had
Why tell everybody you had to ballast it to get it to balance?
We had talked about doing a 985 to save weight, but pretty quickly decided, well, we're going to need the weight up front anyway, so there's really no point.
Right.
Here's another shot that shows the really interesting landing gear arrangement on the Bulldog, which I think a lot of people wouldn't expect. Wouldn't even looking at the airplane, you just wouldn't imagine it would work this way. But you have a center mount, attaching point hinge for both the gear. Since the fuselage is round, the fairings just ride around the fuselage along with these big, heavy gear legs. And Vern's drawings don't show the link behind that, but it does seem necessary. I don't think I have a really great picture of it. Here's another picture of the gear and this link that's coming back behind it here. Without that, I think it would be probably not very sound. And Jim apparently sorted that out and created another hinge area back here, so the gear ride in that. And there's these big pistons here, which are not functional in this, but they kind of give you an idea of what it would be doing.
Right.
This shows you that if I remember correctly from measuring it yesterday, this is 1.5 inch tubing up front here, which that's pretty serious tubing.
Yeah, that's pretty typical looking of a 1340 or 985 engine mount.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so off the top of your head, doesn't sound like it's overkill. Then it sounds like it's about right.
The front end, yeah. I was expecting, when I saw these photos, I was actually expecting the gear to look more like it is in the Going Stinson. That being a pivot point at the longerons, and then it was a rocker instead of having the shock outboard. It was they pivoted at the longerons and have the shocks inboard, and so it's a compression on the strut. And in that direction instead of this way. So this was kind of interesting to me when I know years ago I saw pictures of Jim Jenkins' work over the years, but I never really paid that much attention to it till Tony and I started talking about it. So this is, Bob Hall did go on to do, the gull wing on the Stinson and the rocker gear and all that, but he came up with a plan B, maybe just because the fuselage is so much wider, he had that capability on the.
And you're putting people in that. You're sitting people right over the top of the gear in that airplane.
Yeah.
So you can't send a strut in there.
Yeah, there's a hump cover underneath the pilot and co-pilot seat where all that mechanism was at.
Right. Do you know anything about the internal structure on the Stinson landing gear? Because this is just a box tube, couple doublers. To me it looks like, kind of joints forward there, and they go, man, that's where I would see some potential on the Bulldog design gear.
It was hollow box. It was hollow box. So
yeah, very similar then.
But heavy as heck, just like.
Well, these aren't actually surprisingly aren't that bad. We pulled one off to get it in the trailer, and it was, picking it up. But the wheel and tire was the heavy part. But
okay,
cool. We're gonna weigh this fuselage that we have. And Tony guessed 300 pounds. I think it's heavier than that. We're just kind of, guessing. I guess it's like, if it's Price is Right rules, I'll guess $1. But
right.
But otherwise, I'll guess 301 and go up from there. But it's probably pretty close to 300 pounds, plus or minus 100. Well, not minus. Probably plus. Probably. Yeah. 350 plus or minus 100 maybe is a better way to put it. Does that seem unreasonable? Does that seem about right?
For what I'm seeing there, I mean, that I would say for sure it's probably in that neighborhood. I know the little Z fuselage was probably north of 100 pounds. I don't know how far, but I know it wasn't comfortable to pick up with one guy. It took two of us to move it around. But again, all its weight was way up in the nose because of all that 6 foot wide center section truss business that went out to the wing attach and gear attach.
Yep. Okay. I was going to kind of talk a little bit just about the airplane in general, because we have some photos we could share with everybody while we're just chatting, and feel free to say whatever you feel like about as you watch the photos. But first I want to show is a photo of the aircraft, which is, I imagine, was taken the day it rolled out. And this shows a profile view, and it's kind of a famous photograph of it. A side view. And here we see the original tail. And
which I really like that tail. It's pretty good looking tail.
Yeah, I think we all like that tail.
And of course, this is a red black and white airplane, not a black airplane, but boy, it really looks good in black. We're not going to do it that way because that's not the color scheme, but it makes you think, man, that should have just been black with white stripes. It's pretty sexy looking, but because it's black and white photos, sometimes the red looks black, and that's what we have here. It depends on which filter they use. And we have the original rudder and no fairing around the elevator, around the horizontal stab. No fairing. It's just it looks in construction. If we see another photo, looks very similar to this one. And then also one of the things interesting, they had this exhaust system that was really cool. I don't know if you probably knew about this, but they just thought, I guess, that if they pump the exhaust straight out the cowl, that they would help the scavenge the exhaust gases and make the engine run faster. And
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I read that it was Jimmy Doolittle who saw it and said, "Nah, just cover those things up," and that's what they did. I don't know if that's a true story or not, but apparently at the races. And I've been trying to catalog all the photos I have, which is probably 30 photos or something, and try and put them in context. It's very fun to do that because you can kind of see the evolution of the airplane, over time. Right. Go ahead if you had something to say. Otherwise, I'll keep moving.
Yeah, I think part of that sending the exhaust out of the cowling was a result of Bob Hall flying the Z from Springfield going up to New York to Curtis Reed propeller to get the propeller adjusted on his way going to the races. And the short stacks that were coming out between the cowling and the boot cowl burned a hole in the boot cowl, and they had to help him out of the airplane. He had CO poisoning so bad when he arrived in New York. So he's kind of been, I think he was gun shy on exhaust and getting close to the sheet metal and stuff like that. So that was kind of his idea. The other thing that you notice I have somewhere I saw a photo of the cowling off on this, and the exhaust pipes are the cowling mount as well.
Yeah, so here it is.
Yep.
This is the only photo I know of with the cowling off, and as you said, you can see
that's the cowling mounts.
Yeah. And
then these two on this side, the pipes are going down and for the carb heat. Going through the heat box.
Yeah, and you notice that if you look at the cowl with a careful eye, you'll see that there's no holes for a couple of the exhaust on the left side, but the right side it's holes all the way for every cylinder. Now here's a photo of it with the second. Well, this is really the third tail. The second tail, they just changed the rudder, and you can see it's not painted.
Right.
And apparently that wasn't good enough either, so they added this dorsal fin, and it's hard to pick up in the picture because it's black and white, but that's actually an aluminum dorsal fin that's been just sort of riveted onto the airplane.
Yeah.
What is that? Russell Thorpe jumping in it there in that picture?
No, that looks like Bob Hall.
I think so.
I think this might be Thaw behind the airplane, possibly because I've seen pictures of him, and he always wears these funky pants. So
like the golfer get up there,
yeah. So that's Russell Thaw and Bob Hall, probably on the same day of the first picture we saw. Same filter, obviously, and in the same location. Here's another picture from that, probably from that same day.
Yeah.
And I have another one as well that has the whole team. And I'm sure all those photos were taken on the same day. There's a bunch of them taken in that original configuration.
Sure.
So then we go from that and we get to the tail, the final tail, which looks like this. I'm going to zoom in here.
Mm-hmm.
But that shows the final tail. And this one still has the original cowl. Eventually they changed that as well. And then once they changed the tail, they also added this fairing around the horizontal stab, and they sheeted the horizontal stab. We think that was with plywood. So to make this look like the final configuration, which raced, we would use the final tail and then sheet that horizontal stab and add the fairing.
Right. He was big about adding more balsa fairings and like when they doped up and covered up the exhaust ports, you can see where the sheet metal joins the fabric alongside the fuselage, and some other things on some of those drawings where you can see they were putting fabric on and doping things up. And this photo here I think shows some of that.
So here's the fabric over the. I assume there was a metal underneath the fabric, of course, or maybe not, but somehow the exhaust is routed down to the bottom, I imagine. Which it's funny when you think about the exhaust all the way around. That would probably almost suffocate the pilot too. So they must have had fresh air coming into the cockpit somehow.
Yeah, what part of the problem with the Z was it actually has if you look at a photograph of the Z instrument panel, there's an air vent right in the center of the instrument panel. It looks like an exhaust vent from the overhead.
I have seen that. Yeah.
Okay. And that was piped down. I have a photograph with the airplane partially built fabric on it and things, and it was a aluminum flex pipe that went down to the lower wing root on the right hand side. The problem was there's an exhaust stack 5 feet in front of it, and it's a short stack. I think on this they probably just cut a hole in the back of where those exhaust pipes used to turn, They probably just cut the back of the pipe open and plated the top and then let it blow out the back. So it's just coming out. Each one probably still acts as an individual stack and just blows out the side. But being a dark airplane, you can't see the exhaust streaks.
Yeah, I guess I thought they'd been collected, but you're saying probably not. I wonder if we have room to collect them all down to one. We probably do.
Yeah, you would be able to do it.
Yeah.
It's safer, for sure.
Yeah. When you look at like Delmar ended up going to a collected exhaust. He had individual stacks to begin with, and then he put a Sard exhaust, I think, on it later.
Yeah, really. Yeah. Well, you don't want black streaks down the side of the airplane anyway. You want them on the bottom where it can't be seen. So that's a good reason right there, I guess.
Well, I'll tell you, for us, if when Delmar flew the Z, if it didn't make the exhaust streaks on the side of it, we were going to airbrush them on because it's just so cool on the yellow airplane to see those streaks going down. And talking about the carbon monoxide stuff with Delmar, I mean, we had one of those little sensor things, a little dot that turns a color if you have CO in the cockpit. And before he flew it the first time, he touched this and he says, "These don't work." And that's Delmar for they go black pretty quick on GBs.
That's great.
These instantly turn black. They must not work.
Yeah, they don't work.
So I've got another thing to show you real quick, which is something I saw you posted a while back, which is a story. Which I don't know who that's from. Who wrote this?
Primo wrote that.
Okay, Primo Galletti, who was a draftsman, I think, right?
Right.
Yeah. And okay, this is really helpful information. I read through this. It's just great stuff. And where did you find this?
In a stack of stuff I got from Primo.
Okay.
So when we went to the Granville family reunion in New Hampshire, and that would have been, I don't know, 94 or 95. We'd have to look back at some dates. But they had Bob Hall's sons, Granville's, Granny's daughter, Norma, and we had Gladys Granville, the sister. We had Hiram Jones, the guy that welded all this stuff for all these guys. And Primo and his wife were there. A bunch of other, GB fanatics were all there. And he had a bunch of information. He shared a lot with me on a lot of that stuff.
And I'll post those at some point. They're already online. I saw you post them, and we'll make sure everybody gets to see those. It looks like it kind of starts up what was listed as page 9. Is there more information before that that's interesting? Or
I don't know that I have more pages. I can look through my big box of archive stuff and look and see. I think he was just giving me things that he thought were pertinent on what we were doing. Do
you know if that was that was like a diary he wrote at the time, or was that something he wrote later?
I think it was later. He was a kid at the time, and when these guys were drawing stuff and doing napkin sketches and handing it to Hiram to weld it up, he would go and grab up those little pieces of paper and put them away. And then later he worked at some of the same aircraft companies that some of the brothers did. And that's why he knew them. And he made some of the drawings he did of the Z and some of the airplanes and took notes on these visits.
Just out of curiosity, since we brought him up, is it possible he's in this picture here?
He could be, but I think he would have been. He would have to be the youngest guy there.
I mean, the average age looks like it's like 15 to me because I'm 50. Yeah. Everybody looks really young,
Yeah, it was. I don't know. I've only knew him as a retired guy, so he was older.
Well, I'll be interested to find out later on if he's in there. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Okay. Very interesting stuff.
And do you have the drawings that were by Kirka as well?
Yes, I can bring those up as well. They're good drawings. I'll pop those up real quick.
Some of the notes in his stuff I thought were interesting.
Absolutely.
He refers to talk to Primo, or there's something else I read somewhere.
Yeah. So here's it's pretty clear. One of the things that I like history, and it's sort of a separate hobby of mine. And one of the things that's really fascinating is to walk through the history of the drawing. So I have them up here. This is a drawing from 1957, which is by Jeffries. It appeared in the November 1957 issue of American Modeler. And as far as I can find, it's the first drawing anyone really made of the airplane. And it seems like that's a long time because the plane flew in 1932. This is 57. It's 25 years.
Right.
But, the interest probably wasn't there until then. But this is the drawing he made. It's pretty accurate. Even by today's standards, pretty accurate. The wing doesn't have the sweep back, which became a controversial issue. It wasn't really settled until Clements drew his stuff. Then Hirsch made drawings in 67, which I have a bad scan. I have a better scan I'll put up at some point. Again, no sweep back. And each one of these, if you look at these drawings, it's interesting how each artist has an idea of how fat the fuselage was, how long it was. The proportions
Right.
change each time. And just
Right.
because which photos you look at. In fact, if I bring up some of the photos, I can have the same negative scanned in twice, and one of them will show a different ratio of length to width of the airplane because it's just a different scan. So I see how much they were struggling, and they didn't have film reels available to them probably. So that's 67, and then 71, Mendenhall did this drawing, which is not very good either. I actually have a drawing that came out right before this that explains how Mendenhall thought the wing looked like this. It did not, but there was a drawing in between those two. And then we get to Kirka, which was in 1980. And now we start to get some really good detail. And that, as you pointed out, he had the advantage of talking to some of the designers and people who were around at the time. Here you see that gear arrangement. So it's, the first drawing we have that shows the internal structure. And I imagine that came from talking to Primo. And as you point out here, if I go to the next one, he actually references him somewhere in here. Yeah, Primo Galetti. I don't know who David Bradford was, but that drawing he references was dated 19th of August, 1932. Be nice to find that drawing.
Yeah.
And then Primo's drawing. And then he also references an Aerodigest article that I don't see. I couldn't find that. I went through the archives and couldn't find it.
Okay.
And then he also does a nice job. This is the only drawing I know of the fuel tanks and this dorsal fin. We're not going to do that. So we don't need that, but it's nice to see that. Yeah. And then the fuel tank arrangement, which, 210 gallons, I think it was, of fuel.
Right.
Because this was meant for the Bendix race as well, which is a long distance race.
But it's been a lot of time rolling on the ground to get, if they ever would have gotten it off of that.
Yeah, I know. It's a good point. There's actually a film reel of it taking off at the Cleveland Air Races, and it did struggle to get off the ground. I think that might be because the gear is just so far forward, it really can't lift the tail.
Right.
Which kind of brings us to the subject of concessions, which we should talk about, because this airplane only existed for a few weeks and only for one race. It only really was, built to fly one time in a way. It had to get there, but after that, the idea was, it just needed to fly the race, and maybe they knew and maybe never fly again. In fact, it really didn't. It went home and that was the end of it. So, but we want to make an airplane that can fly many times and do it safely and reliably for 10 years. It's a completely different mission. And to build it exactly the way they built it would not be wise. It just doesn't make sense. There's things they did that were very, very quick under a lot of pressure. And then also they found problems with it. As you know, they were messing with the airplane until the very, very last moment of the race. The plane didn't perform well in the race. And you have to wonder what would have happened if they'd gotten home and had a budget to make it even better.
Right.
So when we think about it, one of the things we talk about is, well, which version do you want to make? Version 1 with the small tail, version 4 with the big tail and the cowl as it raced, or kind of like version 5, which didn't exist, but would be the one that they would have, it would have maybe had, brakes that would be modern brakes, like, you'd want to have if you're trying to fly off of pavement.
Right.
You see what I'm getting at, right? So there's sort of a continuity here of continuum.
Yeah, I think, had they, they were constantly improving. I mean, we can see that just in the days it was at the race. Look at the changes they made. I mean, this guy sitting on the floor and that engine, a cowling off photo, putting a trim tab on it. They're doping up all this and closing up the gaps, just trying to eke out that little bit of help. And I think some of their lateral instability could be from the fact that the gear leg is so far forward and the wheel pants are so far forward. You've got these huge forward skegs out there, and if the nose gets off just a little bit, boy, it really is going to start trying to do this with the airplane. So now you have to build a giant tail in the back to counteract what you have here. Whereas if you got that gear back a little bit, I mean, and they needed the gear forward for the tail skid to be super effective. That kept them from ground looping on landing. You could just get it on the ground, get the tail planted, and the thing would come to a stop. So again, with modern brakes and not landing in huge 1 mile square grass fields, it's a different world. And
it is.
To have that ground handling improvement would be important.
Do you know of anybody who's put together a project airplane with a 1340 in the last 25, 30 years?
We did the Gilmore 121 at a 1340 on it.
Okay, there you go. So you've done it. So you have that's very good. Good, because it hasn't been very common.
Right.
I mean, not very many people are trying to do that. Yeah.
Well, the 985 came along after the 1340 originally. They did the Wasp, and then they came out with the Wasp Junior. And what's really nice about a 985 and why so many projects like it is it's kind of the bottom end's overbuilt because it's still almost 1340 tough, but it's on a smaller displacement, smaller power, and a little bit lighter package. So that's why it becomes pretty popular. And the GBZ, the original one, had serial number 2 985 on it, and it was it was owned. Pratt Whitney owned all those engines, and if you look at a lot of those race photos, when you go back to some of those Cleveland photos, you'll see Pratt Whitney guys that are working on all the airplanes for everybody, changing cylinders and doing all that stuff. They were using all those guys, as test beds for their engines.
Well, it was interesting because we were looking at that one photo where the cowling's off and trying to determine, because there was a little bit of a debate in the drawings as to whether it had a 9085 or a 1340. And it was pretty much put to bed in Vern Clemens' drawings where he quotes Bob Hall. But that 1340 they have hanging on the front of the Bulldog is so different than, what we would consider a modern 1340 that it, I was visually trying to look at it and just went, no, can't, I don't know anything about it,
Yeah, it's a 30 spline shaft. So it's the same size shaft as a 985 today. So it's a smaller shaft, and the case is smaller. The oil sump is real small. There was no prop governor, so there's no big lump on it for that. You have manually greased rocker arms and rocker tubes that are spring loaded that go in place. So again, there's no mounts on the cylinders for cowlings. That was all stuff that was developed later, where the guy said, hey, we need a way to hold our cowling on. And so Pratt added the lugs on there. So we've done a couple of airplanes, Stearmans, and 1929, 1930 Stearmans that have the old 1340, and the Lockheed Vega we're doing now will have the 30s vintage 1340 on it as well. So it's that engine compared to, firewall forward, if you looked at the engine and prop, where you have a ground adjustable prop versus on the old one versus a constant speed on what you would do on a War II 1340, it's about 350 pounds additional weight from the engine mount rubbers forward that you'll gain between the two engines.
Very good. I have a video queued up now, and I'll show that to everyone. This is a video of the Bulldog taking off at the Thompson Trophy race, and you'll see how much time it takes to get the tail up.
Yeah. And you almost see him kicking it back and forth a little bit, trying to get the skid to break loose, Yeah, he's like, come on.
And there it is. Just
about down elevator in it, trying to push the tail up.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
And whereas if you watch the GB, the tail is up almost right away.
Yeah. And the Weddells, I think, are in this series as well, and they come up pretty quick on the tail. Yeah, there's the Weddells. And those were 985 powered airplanes at that time.
So on that note, the tragedy of this story, the good news is there's no tragedy in the sense there's no loss of life, unlike a lot of other race planes. This plane never hurt anybody. But the tragedy is it didn't actually perform very well at the races. And we don't really know why. There's a lot of accounts shortly after the races that attribute it to problems with the propeller. I've heard people say that it was problems with the fuel line. The fuel lines were too narrow. I've heard people say it was the carburetor, that the inlet was too restricted. I've heard a story that no, it was sabotage. That after the race, Bob concluded that somebody had sabotaged him by putting something in the carburetor, and that was what the real problem was. And decided not to tell anybody about it. But I've heard a story that was what really happened. For whatever reason, the airplane performed pretty well in testing. It was fast. I don't remember the exact speed it was, but it was well above 250 anyway, 275, I think, or something like that, pretty close to it. But in the race, it averaged 215 miles an hour. And the reports I've read from people who were at the event was that the engine was struggling after the first half lap or so, and it was clearly missing and not producing power throughout the race. People could actually hear that the engine wasn't performing well. Do you have any thoughts, any perspective on what happened there?
Again, like I mentioned a little bit ago, the Pratt Whitney guys were always there trying to help these guys out, changing jugs and everything else. And it wasn't uncommon to go out and do a qualifying run on one of these airplanes and burn up some cylinders. They took the engine baffles out to reduce drag. And so then they drilled out the jets really big, and that's why you had to, like on the when Doolittle did the speed runs with the R1, and it starts out, it takes off, and you can definitely tell that the color of the cowling and the fuselage, the reds, are the same. He comes back from the trip or doing the runs, and it looks like two different colors because there's so much exhaust soot. They're running the engines way over rich just to try to keep them cool. Yeah. So they were burning them up, blowing them up, tearing them up, left and right. One of the reasons that the Z1 and 31 is Doolittle was in the super solution, and he had an engine problem. So engine problems on these experimental engines of that day, the engines weren't what we're used to with refined World War II technology that's taking care of all the little idiosyncrasies. I mean, they were out there proving what these engines could do, asking for 700 horsepower, 750 horsepower. They were turning these engines in the upper 2000s, 2,700 RPM when they were designed to turn at 2,000 RPM back in that day. So there were really a lot of things going on. He did have an experimental prop on it too. That was one of the first Hamilton controllable props. And they were competing with what Doolittle had, which was the Smith controllable prop. So, he already had that locked up. He had the hot gas from Shell. He had all the cool boy stuff, that he had with his contract.
Yeah.
So it was just, I think it's a combination of things. And it could have been a little bit of any one of those, but I would say that they were having engine problems that was super common for those guys to struggle with the engines.
So on another day with a little bit better technology and support, do you think it could have been competitive?
Yeah, I think there's some things to sort out. I think that it was probably still flying tail heavy, even though he had done everything he could to not be tail heavy. It just looks like it flies tail heavy. When you see the pictures of the airplane, it just looks, you've with RC stuff, you just know, you can look at it and see, oh, well, it just looks like it's flying tail low. And it could be an incidence issue. It could be some other things too.
Just for fun, here's a picture of it rounding a pylon.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got the Gilmore Red Line and the GB. And this is just some airplane that happened to be flying by. That airplane's not part of the race, but there's the Bulldog right there.
Forever famous.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And I think that must have been when they were, this is probably when Doolittle was lapping everybody, because the Bulldog lagged behind pretty quickly after that. And it's not that it didn't win; it's that it came in sixth and got 215 miles an hour as an average speed. That's what to me is really bothersome. There's another quick photo. This is nice because some of these photos really show the sweepback, which was a very controversial aspect. But it's clear from these photos that there's definitely sweepback in the airplane, no question about it.
And the Cicada had sweepback.
Yeah,
so
it did.
It's the sister airplane of the time.
And here we are, probably around the same point in the course as that first photo. There's the Bulldog right there. Yeah, the Cicada, though, I commented recently that I think, I'm not going to show a picture of it. I don't have any handy, but I think Bob used up all the ugly he could find when he made that airplane. That's why the Bulldog was so pretty.
Right.
But, and then it was a Polish fighter that may have been the inspiration for some of these. I think it's a PZL-11. I can't remember all of a sudden, but it had a gull wing as well.
Right.
And it would have been at the National Air Races I read in 1931. So it's possible, 32 or 31, 31. So it's possible that having the ZB or the GBZ done, then, there's a gull wing airplane. That's an interesting idea. And then leaving the Granville brothers, and I'm sure his intent was to do something as different from the Z as possible. He knew they were going to refine the Z and make the R1, and he had to do something different. So, boy, you can't get much more different than a gull wing airplane.
Yeah, he had to make his mark. He really did. Yeah. And I agree with you totally on that these two airplanes were his definition of, like, I'm not those guys.
Yeah.
This is me. I'm on my own.
The press did a lot to make it sound like there was a really intense rivalry and even hatred between these groups, but there wasn't, as far as I can tell from anything they ever left behind. The Granville brothers and Hall respect each other throughout this. In fact, they even helped each other out. Yeah. So I don't think there was any truth to that. I don't know if you have any perspective on their story.
I think it was just a difference in philosophy and where they wanted to go. I think, Bales had become the majority stockholder in SARA, Springfield Air Race Association. And in doing so, it's kind of like race cars today, where you put in a bunch of money and you buy a seat on a race car and you get to run, and you wreck it and the other guys don't get to fly anymore. And it's kind of one of those things where he had bought into the Air Race Association so deep, he was kind of a controlling partner, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah.
And then he wanted to go for the speed record, and he said, I want to put the 750 horse on there, the 1340. And Hall disagreed with it, and he left. But basically on principle, I'm not going to be a part of it. It's not for that. And so actually in the Springfield Museum of Science, there's a whole bunch of the trophies and all the stuff, and the Zeta is in there, a bunch of the other airplanes, memorabilia. And there's one of Bale's business cards of the Granville Brothers aircraft, and it shows him as chief engineer.
Yeah.
So when Bob Hall left, he named himself chief engineer and said, put the engine on.
Huh. Very interesting. I had not heard that.
And so then, a month later, he ground looped it, and then a couple days later, the wing broke off.
And that's I love that theory, because now just for everybody who's following along, we're talking about the crash of the GBZ, which took Lowell Bale's life. Mm-hmm. And at the time, there's a lot of speculation that was because of various things, but maybe a fuel cap came off and hit a flying wire, which it doesn't make any sense to me at all. And from the video, it's pretty clear the wing just completely collapses, and that's just not what's going to happen in that situation. But I read a post by you where you had that theory, and I'd love to hear your full take on it. But the theory basically is, as you said, he had a ground loop a couple of days before. The wing was not maybe properly inspected, and then when he went to fly it at 300 miles an hour, it just collapsed. And how strong is your opinion on that one?
Yeah, I think I based some of that off of a videotape I have somewhere in the box of archives, where it's an interview with, I think it's Tom Granville, mm-hmm. and he's talking about those days and what was going on. And they put the big engine on. Bales had to put the engine on. Some of the stuff I just mentioned right there, and he said that Bales had ground looped it, and they kind of gave it looked at it, and it seemed it would be okay. And then he went out and flew it and said he put it through its paces and she'll hold. And so then they went on to do the speed run. On the day of the speed run, the weather was pretty nice, but the timing equipment failed on the fourth pass. So it became a non-recorded event. It needs 4 complete passes, and the timing equipment failed. So they had to have the alternate day, which is the next day, and the weather was terrible. And so it was really rough and blowing, and you can see some of that in some of the newsreel footage of the airplane on the ground before they're getting in there. You see people kind of holding onto their hats and stuff like that. So he gets in there and he flies, and he's diving in on the first run, which is allowed to be, see, that guy's tall. That guy's like 6'5". But you see he comes in, he's diving in here. And when you do that frame by frame, I've got some of it that I really would slow down. And you can see the airplane pitches down and then comes through horizontal, and then the wing tip actually leaves. It leaves outboard of the flying wire attach. So there's still, that it's hard to see right there because the gear leg's blocking some of it. But the gear doesn't. The way the wings were set up is that more stuff would start folding up and collapsing if you actually lost the right side flying wires. To the wing, because it's a closed loop system. And the left side would start folding up as well.
You're making a really good point there, and it looks like frame by frame.
It's tough to see. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. But in this frame, the wing looks like it's twisting to me.
Yeah. So the wing tip is folding up. So the pitot tube was outboard of the flying wire attach, and the spar, as we were talking, is full thickness spar, 2 inches thick, but in that area is about 3.5 inches tall, and then had an 1.5 inch diameter hole drilled through it, and that was the method that they use for mounting the pitot tube on the little GBs and the Y. It went through the spar, and the pitot lines came out behind the spar to go into the cockpit. And on that photo I mentioned where Bob Hall's holding a wing, I can see it has that type of a pitot mount system on it. So it's my opinion that the rear spar, not an opinion, the rear spar is only about less than 1 inch tall at the outboard aileron hinge. And you've got a crack that occurred at the pitot mount, and that piece of the wingtip, which is a sizable piece. I mean, when you're talking a 66 square foot wing area, there's quite a big piece that would come off just outboard of the flying wires diagonally out to the outboard end of the aileron. And if it, it could have disturbed the aileron at that point too, and the mounting of the aileron, and it's leaving as well. But that piece broke off, and that was enough when you're going over 300 miles an hour to make it a tragic event that it was.
Let me just go through the video a little bit farther, frame by frame, because I think it makes what you're saying makes tons of sense. Just watching this, they're
still wing there.
Yeah, exactly. So if I frame by frame, there's the twist of the wing.
Yeah.
Now the wing's folded up, trailing behind the aircraft, but still it looks like probably attached. Yeah. I can see it down here, I think, maybe, or some pieces of it coming off.
Right. Maybe the aileron or something. Yeah.
And then as it flips around here, it's clear there's something still hanging off over there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's not the fuselage.
Right.
As we come up here, we see the wing
there's even more. Yeah.
Still twisting and flapping around there. But then we have the gear, both sides still intact here, as you pointed out. And you're right, the flying wires are detached.
That right gear leg would have folded over and been flopping around.
And here's the wing still. Now,
I just think you just don't have resolution in that footage. And the copy I have is actually more clear than this. But
well, I just did a quick YouTube search to get this done, to get this, up there. Yeah. But that's a really great theory, and it makes so much more sense than the idea of a fuel cap coming off. And obviously, the one story was a fuel cap came off and hit the pilot. Well, clearly the plane exploded. That's not the pilot incapacitation. The other one was it hit a flying wire. Well, I think that theory we can put to rest.
Yeah, and the gas cap is literally probably the distance from your eyes now to your computer screen. That's how far it was in front of the cockpit.
It wouldn't have time to accelerate to
decelerate. Enough to get in the way.
Decelerate.
Yeah, and so another thing that we got a copy of the Detroit Daily News, the newspaper that was printed that evening after the accident, and it was Detroit Wayne County Airport is where that was run was being done, and there's the way that they did it back then. You had spotters on the entry into the course and on the exit, and they were judging out. It's kind of like contest stuff where you've got the people that are watching everything. And there's an account of the person who was on the entry into the course that as the airplane flew over, the pitot tube landed within walking distance of him. And then he watched the thing spin in.
Yeah, well, there you go.
So, it opened up enough at where the wing broke for the pitot tube to leave the airplane.
Yeah.
So as I think it's pretty simple what happened. It was damaged and he was aggressively trying to. I mean, it's desperate times. They built that airplane in 5.5 weeks to go win some money. They raised $5,000, went to Cleveland and won $18,000.
Yeah.
So it was, they were working to eat, and if they could set another record and make another mark, they could.
It was big money. It was really big money. People don't understand that now, that this was a big deal. This is like being a celebrity. It's like being a movie star to be the winner of this race.
There were 100,000 cars that would be there. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people that would go there.
Yeah. It was a big deal, and you would get access to upper levels of society from being a famous pilot or a famous builder. And besides the money that would come in from business, the contacts you'd make in business, though it turns out that economy didn't last for any of these people. But at the time, they didn't know that. Looking ahead, this was the way to make a living, was to build successful air races. And you got nothing for coming in 4th, 5th, 6th, or 7th, really, to speak of. You had to win. That created a really interesting situation. Well, as happens in history, when there's an event that people are witness to, then there's a lot of emotion about that event. And the emotion is very, very, it turns into theories.
Yeah.
And the first people that get their first theories recorded, those are the theories that last in history. It's very hard to break people away from the theories that were present, with close proximity to the event, because the bias of historians is to take the earliest accounts and use them as assume they're reliable. So we have some really interesting information about the Z and this crash that I don't think anybody at the time said, well, the wing folded up, and that was primarily what happened. Though it's clear from the video that's exactly what happened, right? From watching it with you, I think it's very clear. Right. But nobody said that they all had these different theories that I've heard for years, and they're probably going to last no matter what we do, because they were the first theories. And the Bulldog suffers from that as well. And some theories, that people had about it, the earliest accounts, the earliest speculation is the one that's lasted. We don't really know what happened, and we have to use our common sense now to kind of piece together, knowing what we know now about airplanes and how they work, which were a little, not to demean people then, but we have a little more practical experience to rely on. We can make a little better theories than they might have had.
We have their experience that we've learned from.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Standing on the shoulders of giants, as they say. And speaking of that, we're very grateful to stand on your shoulders as being a very talented and experienced builder. And that's probably a good place to wrap this up, because I'm just so grateful for all the information you've given me and Tony. You've really helped us out. I don't know, Tony, if you have any, I don't want to shut it down if you have more questions, but I feel like we've gotten a lot out of Kevin. He should be able to get some coffee and get on with his day. I don't know what his his schedule's like.
It's lunchtime.
I mean, I think we're good for now. And I think as we go on, I'd love to have more detailed conversations about the construction techniques that we decide to use as we go. And
yeah, I think the fact that, I got my head inside of Bob Hall's way of designing airplanes of that period, that, that could maybe be of value to you guys as far as trying to figure out why things are a certain way. And, there's a lot of things, that you look at. I mean, the canopy is built the same way as the lift off, with 3-piece glass. And, we went through all that. We figured it all out. So
yeah, we
do see that could help.
Do see a lot of those similarities. Well, what I'd love to do sometimes is bring you out when we get a little farther along and we kind of have a good plan, and maybe we start building a little bit, bring you out and just take a look at it with us. If we can make that work, I'd love to have that happen.
Sure.
Yeah. Why not?
Cool.
Kevin, thank you so much. Very, very helpful. Really appreciate it. Thanks for helping out what we're calling the Hall Bulldog Project. Thanks for being a part of it.
Excellent. Appreciate it.
See you later. Okay. Bye-bye.